still believe there's only enough for one, and it's lonely. Oh, I tell sweet. The journey's long, and I feel so bad. I'm thinking back to the last day we had.
All right, we'll get started here in just a second. Just a reminder, thank you. DVD sales of all the discussions are on sale in the vendor area right out here on the 18th floor. If you haven't been down to the second floor, there's a lot going on down there. People soldering things, taking things apart, lots of stuff for sale. Agent Steele's books are on sale in the DVD area as well, and he's giving like some kind of 18-hour marathon discussion that starts at midnight tonight. Don't forget the fourth track, which is the room down the hall. You can sign up and give your own discussion, and we'll be announcing those as the day goes on. Stuff like Stack Overflow and exploits, and hacking the NYC power grid, which is good for blackouts, I suppose. But let's get going with these guys. You've seen them at a lot of the HOPE conferences. Skip, Joe, Lynn, and Bernie S. This is Off the Grid Voice Data Communications.
Thank you. So Bernie, I guess you're up first.
Well, so first of all, this is an incredibly vast topic. It's going to be really difficult for us to cover anything in depth. So this is going to be an overview of a lot of the technologies that you guys can use for communications without any infrastructure at all. So we're going to be talking about various types of radios, the methods with which they work, and some of the things that you can do to get started with radio communications.
So in some of these, we put in some tiny URLs. So if you see a little bit of text with some big letters next to it, that's the big letters are /tiny, tiny URL / that set of letters. So if there's something that intrigues you, like Joe said, this is just skimming over the top of what all is out there, and definitely not getting into any detail about how it works or issues and vulnerabilities or problems with it and things like that, okay?
So how many of you guys are ham radio operators or have any experience? Okay, wow, we have a good amount of those.
All right.
Okay, so all of us up here are as well. So we're coming primarily from the aspect of ham radio operators, but we're going to try to cover a lot of the Part 15 stuff as well, and just give you guys some theory on how it all works. So Ed, do you want to go and explain some of the?
Oh yeah, since a nice percentage of you are amateur radio operators, and we really encourage you to get your ham radio license, which you can get fairly easily Sunday morning at the VE volunteer examination session on the 6th floor, 10 o'clock Sunday morning. Come to the elevator. This is on the wiki if you haven't seen it. Just go up to the 6th floor Sunday morning, and you pay $14, which is the FCC approved price, whatever. And you'll probably pass it if you have even a smattering of technical knowledge. And if you go to the HOPE Wiki, there's a link to all the actual questions and answers used on the FCC exam. So if you just memorize them, you'll pass this thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you have technical background and technical knowledge, and you review some of those questions for the technician exam, you have a high likelihood of passing it. Drop $14, give it a shot, see how it goes. If not, then you know what to expect to come back and do it another time.
It's not necessary to have a ham radio license to do two-way communications. There's a lot of options available to unlicensed individuals, and we're going to talk about some of them too, since the majority of the people here are not licensed hams yet. So I just want to go over some of the categories.
Do they expire? Like I haven't used mine in 30 years.
Yes, 10 years. 10 years. Now, you might be able to get your old call sign back, but you'd have to retake the exams. Yeah. What in the middle? Yeah.
All right. As far as communications options available to everyday folks who maybe didn't have any experience with radio communications or got a ham radio license, you've probably seen walkie-talkies and other things like that available in retail stores. And they fall under several different categories that the FCC has allocated frequencies for. The most common you've probably seen are these little family radio service radios, or FRS. They operate on UHF frequencies around 460 megahertz. They're fairly low power, maybe half a watt or so. It might give you a range of a mile or so These are really commonly used. They're not legal to use for business, but they're commonly used by families, hence the name of the service, Family Radio Service. They're also used a lot by activists. Unfortunately, they're very easy to monitor. So if you're involved in any kind of direct actions and you're using Family Radio Service radios, you can be assured that the police are monitoring those communications and maybe even misdirecting them, jamming them, that sort of thing. I've seen this happen in Philadelphia. That's a good example of a inexpensive Family Radio Service radio. I picked this up for $5 at a drugstore, so they're very inexpensive. They're just good for quick and dirty communications. They're not secure. They're fairly short range, maybe half a mile or a mile or so, but it's just something to use. Those are some of the Family Radio Service frequencies, and there's a URL at the bottom there, E5KRB, if you want to check that out. Next slide.
You want to go to MERS?
Yeah. There's another category of radio service that the FCC has authorized more recently called MERS. I forget what the acronym stands for, Multi-Use Radio Service or something. They're on a VHF frequency. Bottom line is they're a little more power. I think they're about 2 watts, and they give you more range, and you can use them legally for business purposes, unlike FRS.
Which one do you want to go?
They're all narrowband FM, which bottom line means the fidelity isn't high fidelity like an FM broadcast station, but it's perfectly understandable. There's also been this service, General Mobile Radio Service, has been around for decades. They're also on the UHF frequencies, some of which are shared by the Family Radio Service, and these require an $85 license from the FCC. There's also GMRS base stations that are available up to 50 watts in power. So there are also GMRS repeaters, so people in a community could communicate, 20, 30 miles away with the GMRS repeater on a mountaintop. But again, they require a license. Most of the cheap FRS radios you buy in stores also have some GMRS frequencies in there, and you'll find a little note in the manual in very tiny print saying, to use the GMRS frequencies, you must have an FCC license. But almost nobody does this. So the GMRS people are kind of upset that the FRS radios have sort of moved in on their band. You might have seen some of the HOPE staff members walking around with two-way radios, and the ones you're seeing pictured here are what we're using. These are made in China, and they're designed to compete with Motorola, who's sort of the king in radio communications equipment for government and military. And these radios operate over a very wide frequency range. They're 4 or 5 watts in power, depending on whether you're using a UHF or VHF frequency. They're programmable with the PC. And they also have some interesting features. It has 16 channels, but you could literally program any of the 16 channels. Could be any one of thousands of different frequencies. One of the interesting features of these radios is they envoy some form of voice privacy, something called inversion scrambling. It's not super secure, but it makes a casual listener with a radio scanner unable to listen to the communications. And we weren't really that paranoid about that here at the HOPE conference, but it didn't cost anything to program that feature into these radios. So we did that. So those of you who are trying to listen to us and weren't able to, that's why. And this is the newest, most interesting option available to unlicensed radio operators in this country, I think. The FCC has a whole category of unlicensed radio services called Part 15. It's just the body of law called Part 15. And one of the services, it's not really a service, one of the rules they've passed down, regulations, is that two-way radios can, using some of the unlicensed bands in the 900 megahertz band, the 2.4 gigahertz band, and the 5.8 gigahertz band, can use frequency hopping, which means that the channel changes very rapidly, several times a second. It makes it hard for someone else to listen to. It also reduces the chance of interference from another user to almost nothing. These radios from a company called Tri-Square came out about 1.5 years ago, and we're going to put one of them up there. There's a switch between camera or computer.
Yeah, got it.
Is that up there? Okay, great. Okay. These things are really neat. You can get a pair of these with drop-in chargers and voice-operated headsets for $80 on Amazon. they're 1 watt, 900 megahertz. And the neat thing about one of the neat things about this radio is you can program the frequency hopping pattern into this using a 10-digit number. There's an algorithm in there. You choose a 10-digit number. It can be like a phone number, whatever. And unless someone else knows that 10-digit number, it's going to be very difficult for them to hear that communication. So if you're with an activist group or you're running a business that you don't want others to overhear your conversations, or maybe your favorite fishing spot, you don't want anybody to hear what you're talking about, where the fish are, that sort of thing.
Is that
These
fish
are
with a PH or fish with an F?
exactly.
It's not encryption. It's not encryption. It's frequency
Right.
hopping. So theoretically, it is possible to determine the hopping sequence if there aren't a lot of users in the band. But
It's akin to encryption because there's so many different virtual channels. Literally 10 billion channel possibilities. They use 700 different frequencies in the 900 megahertz band, but the different hopping sequences between those, it hops like 2.4 times per second, make it virtually impossible for someone unless you're government or have a lot of resources at your disposal, or maybe a few $1,000s to buy a
Software-defined
GNU
radios.
radio project. We were demonstrating that at the W2H station yesterday. Unless you have a lot of resources and time on your hands, it'd be very difficult to monitor these. And for the price, you can't beat them. There's also some things on the market called simplex repeaters. You can plug a little box about the size of a pack of cigarettes into one of these radios or any of the other radios I've just shown, and put it on a high point, either like the top of the Hotel Pennsylvania or on a mountaintop or anywhere else, and then other people can use that as a repeater to communicate over a wider distance. So if one of these radios were on top of a mountaintop, you could talk 20, 30, 40 miles away through this to someone else equally far away.
So the only one of those that legally you cannot do that on is MERS. The FCC specifically addressed that on MERS, that they did not want people building repeaters on MERS frequencies. So when it first came out, they didn't have that, and a whole bunch of people put up these MERS repeaters, and a few people, and the FCC went back and said, no, this is not what we intended.
The
And
the
they
FCC
changed.
changes.
But that's the only one.
The FCC tends to change rules as they go along, but that's at the FCC. So check these things out. If you go to trisquare.us, you can read about it. I'm not selling them, but the company has donated a pair of these to give away at the conference. We'll figure out a way at the end of the talk to figure out who's gonna get these radios. One last thing I want to talk about is communicating to a large group of people one way, and that would be broadcasting. This device here is sort of informally referred to as a grenade. It's a 10-watt shortwave radio transmitter. It operates around 6.955 megahertz, but there's a crystal you can see on the front you can plug in for different frequencies. This was homemade, and this particular transmitter was used a while ago to make a broadcast which was heard 500 miles away in 2 different directions. So you're talking about a diameter of broadcasting of about 1,000 miles. Now, depending on the propagation conditions, this may or may not work, but this is a technique that's used by intelligence agencies around the world to get messages, not necessarily a low power transmitter like this, but higher power transmitters intelligence agencies use to broadcast encrypted messages in five number groups. It's like a one-time pad encryption system. So if you need to get it, if you have like a group of people around the country, around the world, you want to get messages to securely, you could use one-time pad encryption with a low power or even a high power shortwave transmitter and get that information out to them, and it's fairly secure. So we can have more questions and answers after the end of this talk, but that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about.
I'm going to go over a little bit about how that actually works. If you could switch back to the slides. Okay, so the radios that he was demonstrating before, which are the handheld radios, operate in the VHF and UHF frequencies, which is probably what most of you guys are familiar with. Cellular phones are a little bit above that, and a lot of the FRS radios are, well, they are VHF, UHF radios. So what Ed was talking about with the grenade, that's actually an HF radio. So it transmits on the shortwave bands, which actually have unique propagation characteristics when compared to the VHF and UHF bands. So actually, when he's transmitting with that grenade transceiver and people are hearing it 500 miles away or so, they're not actually hearing they're not actually receiving a direct line of sight from that transmitter. They're actually